welcome to Dead Man Talking. Come with me as we step into the deep, dark forest of fear, and let's pray that we see sunrise in the morning. Tonight's show, guys, is a compilation of extremely terrifying and troubling, I believe, devil dog encounters. Of course, please do let me know down below in the comment section what you thought. As ever, please do like and share. If you haven't subscribed to DMT, smash that subscribe button and throat punch the notification bell to stay up to date with all DMT content. Without further ado, let's get into tonight's first story, entitled I adopted a stray dog, but it isn't what it seemed. Let's get straight into that. Yes, I know that there are other subreddits to post animals and pet-related experience and problems, but this is so bizarre and surreal that I do not know where I can go to share my experiences. I work for an animal rescue organisation by the name Helping Paws. Our primary work is to rescue stray animals, mostly dogs and cats, give them proper medical facility and find them a loving owner and a permanent shelter. I am with this organisation for the past 12 years, so I've seen quite different kinds of dogs, and trust me, the puppy I adopted is nothing like that. It was raining the night we found the puppy in an abandoned cardboard box which was carelessly placed in a dark, waterlogged alleyway. Christine, a girl from the organisation, was the first to find it and brought it into the office. The puppy had grey hair all over his body and glassy brown eyes. It was really small too. Sam, our veterinarian, gave it a quick check-up and concluded it had a fever. "Don't worry," he said. "It's a minor one. I've given him some medicines and it will be fine by tomorrow." The next day, I entered the office and received the good and the bad news. The good news was the pup was fine. It had gotten over its fever and was now running about the garden. The bad news was that Sam submitted his resignation last night. He had specified no reason for quitting. Later, we would come to know that he had left the city that very night. Our confused minds were put to rest when we saw the puppy running around the garden with the other dogs. It looked very happy and very cute, and suddenly I wanted to take it home. I'd never owned a pet in my life, and since the day I started work at the organisation, I always wanted a pet but never able to adopt one. Now, however, I felt sympathy for the puppy and wanted to adopt it. I conveyed this feeling to my colleagues and they readily agreed. Thus started my life with the puppy. I named it Buzz, don't ask me why, and it quickly became friendly to me. I played with my dog and generally enjoyed the whole time with it. Under my care, it started to grow very soon, and that was the time that I noticed it. The puppy, it seemed, well, it was growing too fast into something that was anything but a dog. First, its hair grew at an astonishing speed. Very soon, its body was covered with grey hair. I could hardly see its eyes, nose, or any of his facial features now. So, I took it for a haircut, which cost me a great deal, but ended in failure. Did not matter how much you cut its hair, it simply didn't end. After a year, it lost its excess hair, but this strange characteristics transferred itself to its nails. Very soon, its nails started to grow. There was no natural growth either, mind you. Its nails could easily put that of a tiger's to shame. I lost at least 5 nail clippers trying to cut his nails. The behaviour of Buzz also underwent a change. It would spend nights outside its kennel. In the morning, it would bring dead cats, rodents, mongoose or birds and lay it in front of me as if a trophy of some kind. At first, I ignored this behaviour, but soon the neighbours started to complain of missing pets, and I started to keep Buzz inside the house during the night. I did not believe the next morning when I saw that my dog was missing and there was a gaping hole on my front door. Buzz returned in the afternoon. In its mouth was a dead pigeon. Buzz's dietary habits changed too. Earlier, I used to give him the best dog food available in the markets and he used to eat it eagerly. Now, however, his eagerness was towards raw meats. On walks, it chased after birds and cats, not with mischief or playfulness, but with murder on its eyes. Yes, eyes. They turned to a distinct red colour during this time. Early this year, another change came into Buzz. The dog's skin was no longer grey, but a mixture of shades of red, purple, black and white. This March, small structures that could only be described as horns started to grow on his skin. Buzz became more aggressive. It no longer wandered near me and stayed out of the house for days at end. I searched for a solution online, posted my experiences in countless dog and canine subreddits and message threads, but no one could identify what was happening with Buzz. I called up a friend of mine, a zoologist by profession, to look into this matter. He agreed to come down and check on my dog. It was a Sunday and the day was very hot. When he arrived, I showed him the way to the kennel and went inside to fetch 2 glasses of lemonade from the fridge. As I was about to return, I saw my friend hurrying for the exit. "What happened? Where are you going?" I called up behind him. He looked at me with his eyes full of fear. Andrew," he gulped. "Run, Buzz! He is... And he got in his car and sped away as soon as possible, nearly hitting a truck that was taking a turn. I returned to his kennel and saw Buzz sleeping peacefully. My zoologist friend was hit by a car the following week. Earlier this month, Buzz started to show some more peculiarities. His skin now gives a faint glow. The horns on his skin has grown to a certain height now. It no longer barks but growls every time. Christian offered to help, saying that Buzz needed a change of air. She kept it with her for a week. Last week, I heard the news of Christian's death. She was found with slashes all over her body, and my dog was missing. Within the sadness of the news of Christian's demise, I was happy that Buzz was nowhere to be seen. However, Buzz returned today. It was raining yesterday night, and due to which, he was shaking with cold. Looking at him like that, it reminded me of Buzz when we found him as a puppy. I remembered all the fun time I spent with him. Was I too harsh with my assumptions? Yes. It may have become a dangerous beast, but it still was my good boy Buzz. I think I will be keeping him and putting up with all of its peculiarities and killings. But at the back of my mind I wonder if I'm doing the right thing, particularly when it looks at me with those menacing eyes. Last Sunday, he went for my hand when I was trying to pet him. I got quite a slash on my hand thanks to that, but that was surely just a gesture of affection. Well, there you go. He's growling again. Isn't he cute? It was no family dog. Let's get straight into that. I work as a cleaner at a warehouse just outside the city. I have to show up at 5 AM in the morning, which is a lot earlier than I'd usually be okay with, but it's so close to my home I can bike there in less than 10 minutes. So when I was offered the job I thought, what the hell, maybe I could become a morning person. I started the job in May, so it was already light outside when I woke up at 4:30 AM. To get to the warehouse from my town I had to pass under a small bridge and past a couple of fields. It was rather idyllic trip and I enjoyed seeing the sun peek over the horizon every morning just as I reached the warehouse. It got to a point where I even looked forward to it. I had indeed become a morning person. One Friday morning, just as I came out from under the bridge, I thought I heard a sound and looked over my shoulder. Some distance behind me I saw a dog running towards me at full speed, like it was trying to catch up to me. It wouldn't be the first family dog to escape from its backyard in my town, so I slammed the brakes on my bike and turned around to greet it. It was gone. I whistled and called for it. Nothing. I had to be at the warehouse in 4 minutes, so I didn't have time to look for it and hoped it would be okay as I got on my bike. I looked for it on my way home, but of course it was nowhere to be seen. The weekend came and went, and I had forgotten all about it until the sight of the bridge Monday morning reminded me of the dog. I looked around just in case. When I looked over my shoulder, it was there, running towards me. I quickly got off my bike, but while I looked away, it disappeared again. I suddenly felt uneasy. It was too reminiscent of the last time, so quickly I got on my bike and left. The next morning, I looked over my shoulder again, and sure enough, the dog was there. I didn't stop, but when I turned around to look at the road for a second, the dog was gone when I looked back. This continued for several days, and I started to notice the dog was getting closer. Eventually, I realised it was starting from the place I had last seen it the day before, and I began to wonder what would happen when it caught up with me. Some days, I didn't dare look back in case it would be too close. I told my best friend about it, and she's very sceptical, and I could tell she didn't believe me. "Why don't you take a photo of it?" she suggested. "Maybe someone will recognise it." So she still thought it was a normal dog. but taking a photo made sense. Next morning, I got my phone ready and switched on the camera, even before I got on the bike, and kept it ready in my back pocket. As I passed under the bridge, I took it out and switched to the front camera so I could see behind me. No dog, just my face and an empty road. Confused, I looked behind me just in time to see a running man reach for me. I was so shocked I lost control of the bike and fell into a ditch, flailing wildly, ready to be attacked. But nothing happened. I looked around panicked but couldn't see anyone. I was alone. When I got to work, I hid in the bathroom and immediately looked for an alternative route to the warehouse. I found one that would add 34 extra minutes to my commute, and I've been using that ever since. Encounter in Brazil. Let's get straight into that. My name is Gabriel Santos Cabral. I am 20 years old now, and my encounter happened when I was 6 years old, turning 7. Back then, my family and I lived in a country stead, in Londrina, Paraná, Brazil. It wasn't a rural property. It was more like a country summer house, but in the city. The property was just outside the suburbs, in the northwestern part of the city, edging the city limits and nearer the country. It was approximately 420 square metres, so 502 square yards, piece of land, surrounded by 2 metre, 6'5" walls, for more privacy. The house sat in a far corner of the property with a good view of the surroundings, 90 to 95% of the view of the whole property from the front porch of the house. The region, North Paraná, where the city lies, resembles southern Missouri or northeastern Kansas, but it's tropical, rather than temperate or subtropical. The city is a metropolitan area, with a population of 486,000 plus people. It would resemble Wichita, KS or Kansas City MO. The landscape is fairly flat with some hills, and the scenery has little vegetation with only some parks and nature preserves, none big enough to have a decent population of any medium to large animal species whatsoever. There are no bears in Brazil, and the largest predators found in the wild are the maned wolf, the southern South American cougar, and the Pantanal jaguar, none of which really could be identified as what I saw. My encounter was brief, but it was clear enough for me to make out the shape of the creature, its colour, size, etc. So, on to the encounter. It was Friday, October the 18th, 2002. It was mid-spring in the southern hemisphere, and that night was a full moon. With relatively cloudy skies, we had a dozen dogs on the property, which all slept together in a large kennel on the side of the house. They would be pretty quiet at night, but on that night, they were unsettled and spooked. One of the dogs managed to escape from the kennel and was desperately trying to get into the house. I was alone with my mum, and she asked me to turn on the floodlights outside the house and check out what all the fuss was about. I did that and went to the front porch to scan the area, trying to see what could have scared the dogs. Staring at the corner where we had a mango tree 90 or 120 metres away, that's 98 to 130 yards away, I saw this large greyish creature running on all fours, avoiding the lights. It passed behind the mango tree and disappeared into the dark. As I saw it, I immediately identified it as being a werewolf, like that of the movie Bad Moon in 1996, but with a slightly larger head, a thicker snout and bulkier build. On its hind legs it must have stood at the very least as tall as the property walls, 2 metres or 6'5" feet. I stand 1.74 metres or 5'7", by the way. I froze for a few seconds after seeing it. It was a brief sighting. It lasted 2, possibly 3 seconds, and as soon as I recovered from shock, I sprinted as fast as I could back into the house and locked all the doors and closed the windows that were still open. I was familiarised with the werewolf movies back then. I was already aware of the impossibility of there being someone who could shapeshift into a monster. But what I saw was unmistakably similar to a werewolf. So, since that encounter, I started to believe in werewolves, only under some concept of Dogman, which are natural rather than supernatural, and look the way they do 24/7, a term which I only came across recently. And this is the encounter I had with a dogman. Just like in the US, where there are places where sightings are frequent, there are places in Brazil where they happen frequently too. In the US, it would be Elkhorn, WI, Taylor, MS, and Marshall, TX. In Brazil, it will be Joanapolis SP and Tres Lagos MS. Joanapolis has sightings of werewolves, Dogman, ever since its foundation. Its first mayor was said to be a werewolf back in the mid-late 1800s. The town is filled with werewolf references. Tres Lagos has had many sightings ever since the 1980s and early 1990s. There was a series of nights in the small city in the 1990s where people claimed that a werewolf was roaming the streets at night after dark, trying to invade houses, climbing on roofs and howling all night long, scaring people, dogs and attacking livestock. It really did scare people. The state police began reinforcing night patrols and started investigating, assuming that someone was out at night in a suit scaring people. Some cryptozoologists have even collected DNA samples. As it turned out, it wasn't human DNA or that of any known animal, and it certainly wasn't artificial hair from a suit. Regards, Gabriel Cabral. Time, late night around 10:30 p.m. Date, Friday, October 18th, 2002. Field stalker sighting on Mackinac Bridge. This event took place along the Mackinac Bridge in northern Michigan. I still can't seem to get a grasp on what exactly happened, as my whole worldview of things was shattered to pieces. I used to be a fairly open-minded person who loved all things paranormal and mysterious, but what I saw has kept me in a persistent state of denial that anything of this sort is allowed to walk the earth. It was a freezing January evening as I drove along the empty, snow-caked highways of northern Michigan, making my way south to the connecting bridge that joins the two halves of the state. I had just finished spending a weekend visiting my grandparents, as they recently had my first child and desperately wanted them to meet their great-grandson. My grandparents were in their late 90s and had retired to a tiny town a little ways into the northern half to spend the rest of their years. Being that they can't drive and don't get many visitors, I was more than happy that I was able to bring along the little ray of sunshine to the tundra they called home. I cruised along the highway as a steady fall of snow was rapidly picking up. I had to keep on the high beams as I drove a blazing 35 miles an hour through the empty night, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror at my sleeping baby. For privacy reasons, we'll refer to him as Jack. He sat snug and warm in his car seat, and despite the roaring blizzard gaining strength, he was out like a light. As midnight rolled over and the bridge came into view, a large snowplow made its way past me as my tyres made first contact with the bridge. I was relieved to see the long strip of grey asphalt amidst the sea of blinding white, and that was harshly illuminated in my headlights. While having a baby cured me of my poor driving, I didn't want winter to throw me into the icy waters. I continued to drive cautiously along the bridge as the blizzard started to quickly die down, though I had a decent-sized truck. It was old and on its last leg, and I didn't want to take any unnecessary risks. Staring down the long stretch of the road gave me an eerie feeling, as there were no cars in front or behind me. For anyone who doesn't know, the Mackinac Bridge stretches over 4 or 5 miles over open water. I drove along for a few minutes, and the absence of other headlights started to actually seem peaceful, until I saw something. In the distance between the falling snowflakes, I could make out a figure heading towards me at a great speed. My first thought was deer, even though I wasn't really sure how one would have gotten this far along the bridge, or even want to for that matter. I closed the distance between the two of us, just thinking that it would either stop in my headlights or veer out the way, but it just kept coming. It was approaching me so fast I began to tap on the brakes before I felt the car lose control and began a gut-wrenching slide. Oh my God! I thought, as I feared I would fall off the bridge and lose my baby. The car began to slide perpendicular to the road, and I could see the white figure of what I thought was a deer continue its way towards me. I was sliding out of control at 40 miles an hour on a bridge that held a 100-foot drop to a certain depth below me. I glanced one more time to the right as the figure was certain to collide at any moment. I quickly unbuckled and jumped in the back without thinking to shield Jack. I felt a violent impact and a harsh shriek that followed as my car spun around a few times before stopping in the newly formed snow. I sat there for a second in stupor before coming to hear my baby crying. I sat in the back seat crying for a minute while holding Jack, so relieved that we were okay. He was unharmed, not a scratch on that beautiful face of his. I soothed Jack and placed his pacifier in his mouth before finally looking out the car to see what I might have hit. I glanced to the right to see a figure writhing in the snow a good distance back from where we initially collided. I figured it must have been in horrible pain, so after I made sure Jack was calmed down after a few minutes, I exited my car. I popped the trunk to retrieve a large crowbar that my husband had put there in case of emergencies. I always tease him for worrying like that, but I felt that I needed to put this animal out of its misery, one way or another. I slammed the trunk and turned to it, but something seemed wrong. Through the falling snow, I could see a twitching figure that resembled something more like a human than a deer. I cautiously approached as the figure continued to tremble on the ground, and I felt my stomach grow sick as whatever it was started to take form. On the ground lay something from your worst nightmares. A pale, white humanoid creature sat on the ground, convulsing as a very apparent compound fracture was protruding from its arm. It had one eye on the left side of its face that seemed to be rotting out of its misshapen head, and mouth seemed to stuck in a twisted grin, revealing a set of serrated teeth. It rolled around as blood, and as a thick black substance oozed from its mouth that strung to its teeth. Fear coursing through me, I raised the crowbar and struck whatever this monster was right on the forehead. I hit it dead centre, and for a moment it stopped. I stared down at this thing in disbelief as it laid still on the road. Not wanting to take any chances, I raised my weapon once more. But as I did, the horrible sound of Jack's crying split into the night. I stopped, and I was almost like my baby's crying had alerted this creature. It somehow picked itself up, while its body contorted and shifted in unnatural ways, before standing just 10 feet from me. Its forehead had a prominent dent in it, and blood continued to pour from its mouth down its torso. It was then that it spoke. I still hear that voice as I wake deep in the night in sweat, in a voice laid deeply in what sounded like static, like there were 3 voices saying it at the same time from all directions. "Can we please stop?" It sounded like the voice of a young teenage boy. My lips quivering, all I could do was let out a gasp of, "What are you?" to it. "What are you?" And that same awful voice came back to me several seconds later, but it was my voice this time. We stood there for what felt like hours as the snow fell onto my shoulders. It reared back and let out this horrible cry. It was familiar. It was the sound of my crying baby. It was so loud and jarring that I felt it kick in my stomach as I fell to my knees. Jack promptly let out his own wail as a result of the scream. This snapped me out of my stupor as I realised the gravity of the situation. I turned back to the car to haul out as fast as possible. But as I turned, I felt it sprint right by me and knock me to the ground. In a panic, I looked up to see it standing next to my car, staring through the side window. It somehow flew past me and got to it in an instant, and it was staring right at my baby. I made my way to it, and what felt like slow motion, I saw it reach a disgusting, emaciated arm into the window, and at that moment I heard Jack's wailing cease. A fire burned in my eyes in that moment that must have been fueled by the kind of adrenaline that only a mother trying to save her baby could feel. I sprinted towards it and unleashed hell on its head with a crowbar, while I bashed into it with all my might over and over again. It just seemed to smile at me with those menacing teeth, and a smile that mocked my efforts, like it was laughing at my attempts to save my child. It eventually fell on the ground, and its head was all but fleshy pulp sitting in a flesh-coloured sack on its shoulders. I jumped in the car as it started to twitch once more, and I floored it. I felt my wheels spin, but as they began to catch, I saw it sit up sharply and turn towards the car. It quickly rose up as I began to accelerate, and through the broken windows and harsh freezing wind, I could hear its horrible voice. "Where are you? Where are you? Where are you?" The grainy static rang in my ears, accompanied by the harsh wails of the Jack in the back seat. I glanced in the rearview mirror as I tried my best to keep the car under control, but my heart sank as I looked back to see it gaining distance on me. It actually screamed in this moment as its body limped along the bridge at impossible speeds, while its head barely kept itself steady, swinging around at its shoulders. "I'm over here!" rang out like it was right in my ears. I glanced down at my speedometer as I was failing to gain speed on the icy road. 30, 35, 40. I looked back and it was still gaining on me. It reached the rear of the car and began slamming its mangled body parts into the back windshield and side doors. I was bawling at this point like the infant in the back seat of my car as my old, slow truck accelerated. It had completely shattered the glass and was trying to pull itself inside the car at this point. It let out a wail that almost harmonised with my own baby's screams before it was barely hanging onto the car as I approached 60 miles per hour, and it finally lost its grip. I heard it thump onto the ground and tumble in the snow while I somehow maintained control of the vehicle. It didn't seem to get up this time, or if it lost interest or it simply couldn't continue. I stared into the rearview mirror as it started to grow smaller and smaller until eventually reached the end of the bridge. I rode into town and immediately stopped at the first open establishment I could find. I think it was some sort of diner that I ended up at. I really can't remember where. The only thing I remember was frantically speaking to an employee before looking at my baby's face to see a small cut run along the side of his cheek, just under his eye. It has been over 14 years since this took place, and needless to say, I have kept my distance from Michigan. I moved as soon as I was able to, and I never plan on returning. I have never told anyone about what happened until now. As for my car, I just told people it was a freak accident that I drove into a huge deer, though I'm not sure everyone bought it. Recently, Jack has been experiencing some traumatic night terrors, but he will not open himself up to any doctors or psychologists about what is happening in these dreams. I dismissed the chances of it being related to that night, as he was barely 1 year old and could have not retained the events. As his sleep suffered more and more, he grew increasingly distant. His night terrors became a regular occurrence, and my heart is breaking to see my baby suffer this way. I walked into his room one morning as he laid asleep in bed. He had a relatively peaceful night, and I was wanting to make sure that everything was okay. I stared down at him and stroked his hair for a few minutes as he breathed slowly and heavy. As my finger ran across his face and into the divot of a small scar on his cheek, something caught my eye. On his bedside table, one of his notebooks from school laid open, and I could tell from the short distance that it was a drawing of something. I picked up the notebook and felt my heart sink as I stared into the face of the one-eyed creature, smiling at me. Hope you guys enjoyed those short, extra creepy encounters. As ever, do let me know down below in the comments. Please do like and share. And remember, if you're going out camping or hiking in a deep, dark forest, keep your wits about you. And above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.